Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are right now. I'm May Talandron Felipe. On behalf of Bojang, I'll be the moderator for today's APSCE webinar session. And we are very happy that we have with us none other than Professor Edward Palmer from the University of Adelaide, Australia. For this afternoon, the topic of our webinar is the role of AI in education and assessment. So just to give a brief background of this afternoon session, we're going to discuss the impact of AI that it has in education. We will be able to listen from Professor Palmer the key aspects of the University of Adelaide's approach to the impact of artificial intelligence on staff, students, and learning to illustrate a holistic response to this new technology that we have right now. He will also discuss the role of AI in policy, attitudes of staff and students towards this new technology, and how his institution is training both the staff and students to use these tools ethically. He will also discuss the role of communities of practice, research, and training in revising and developing assessment tasks. While the goal of the session is to open discussion of courses developed for staff and students, the impact of AI on courses design and development of a framework to evaluate how the resilience of assessment can be quickly evaluated. Results of staff and student surveys towards AI will be shared as well as the pilot results of the application of the resilience framework. All right, so at the end of the discussion, everyone would also be given time to ask questions. So you can post your questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom so that Professor Palmer could answer them later on. All right, so please help me virtually welcome our speaker this afternoon, none other than Professor Edward Palmer. Professor Edward, I'm now giving you the virtual floor.
Lovely. Thank you, May. Appreciate that nice introduction. Thank you. All right, let's kick off by having a brief introduction to the context that I'm working in and the and a little bit about myself as well. So we're going to be talking about AI and education assessment. I really don't need to give you an overlay about what I'm going to talk about. May has done a wonderful job doing that. So we'll move on. We're going to start off with a quick question. So those of you who are those of you who have your phones with you, you could just scan that. Failing that, I'm just posting the link to the Mentimeter in the chat, and it's just one short question. What concerns you most about AI in education? So feel free to scan or use the link, and we'll just allow a minute for that. Very good, and I'm sure we've all just seen that message about an AI assistant helping us take notes for the meeting. So there's something that's very useful with AI in education. Okay, we've got about half the group going, but there's maybe some of you on streaming as well, so please feel free to join in. But we've got a nice little word cloud developing here, which I'll share with you shortly. Okay, excellent. All right, so let's have a look and see what we're concerned about collectively. If we have a look here at the word cloud, we can see that there's quite a number of different issues that are coming out here. Already up to 57, please keep them coming. We've got things like learning analytics, authenticity, assessment, education, plagiarism, We've got other things such as privacy and cheating, misunderstanding, originality issues, abuse, which was one of the ones that kicked it all off, but it's actually very, very small now compared to ethics, plagiarism, and education, authenticity, and innovative. So innovation. I think we could all agree that innovation is a clear descriptor of what artificial intelligence is all about. The other aspects of it are, I guess, things that we're genuinely concerned about. So things like ethics and plagiarism, how education, how learning actually happens. They're the things that I think most of us are collectively interested in. Now, I'm not going to be talking too much about what artificial intelligence is. I'm assuming that everyone knows that at this stage. But just keep in mind some of the things that we've got here. I think plagiarism, ethics, learning, and education are probably the key aspects. Okay, so thank you for doing that. That's very much appreciated. And it gives us all a bit of a feel for where we're sitting in this particularly interesting conundrum that we have as an education group now. Okay, so I work at the University of Adelaide. It's an institution of around about 17,000 students and about 2,000 academic staff. We have 3 faculties. We've got a science, engineering, and technology, which also includes maths. We have a health faculty, and we've got the faculty that I live in, which is arts, business, law, education, humanities, economics. We call it the faculty of, give it an acronym, which we call ABLE. The university also runs a series of communities of practice across the university. It's designed to support, I guess, a lot of learning activities that happen around the university, including a lot of strategic initiatives. I used to run the one on virtual reality, but given that there's only so many resources around, I switched to artificial intelligence. I saw that there was probably going to be a need for that within our university. And that was proven to be correct because the AI community of practice is the largest and broadest of all the communities of practice. We have over 100 members from all across the university, including academic and professional staff. I work across all faculties. I collaborate with people across a load of faculties, but I'm based in the School of Education in Fable. About me, so I've got an engineering Bachelor of Science background, spent a decade doing computer development work, mainly in educational software. I have various graduate certificates. PhD is in medical education, and I've got a diploma in creative writing and Bachelor of Arts in media. Currently Professor in Educational Technology at the University of Adelaide, and I'm the Director for our Unit for Digital Learning and Society. I also work on Ghana land. So I'd like to, before we move this presentation on, I'd like to acknowledge that I work on Ghana land and give my respect to the elders past, present and future. It's a custom that we have in Australia, and it's a good one. It acknowledges the fact that their land was colonized and they never ceded those lands. All right, let's move on. We run a number of AI-based projects in my unit. We've done a few. We've got a survey of staff and students to find a baseline. So we ran that late last year, and I'll report some of the findings of that a little bit later on. We look at the role of technology with creatives. So it's got an AI focus, but multiple technologies come to the fore with people that create art. We've got a project on a risk rubric for assessments. We're using AI to design multiple choice questions. We've got 2 courses which we've been involved in developing, ethical AI use for students and one for staff as well, both online, running in our learning management system of choice, which is Canvas, and the ethical use for students course will be out in edX later on this year. And we're also looking at AI in developing movies. So we've got quite a broad remit, but our main focus typically sits around how people use AI ethically, how they use it for assessments, and how the learning process is impacted by the fact that AI exists. I'd just like to acknowledge the people on the screen there. Daniel Lee's my postdoc, and I've got many PhD students working in this space, and some of the work you're seeing here is attributable to them. So acknowledge that. All right, so one of the things that we wanted to do first was try and figure out what we were working with. So if we flash our minds back to last year, as AI became a bit more of a media beast, more people became aware of it, particularly staff and obviously students as well. But the staff were particularly interested, and we were interested in knowing how much they knew about the topic and how they might have been reacting to it. So we looked at that. We also did the same thing with students, and I'll show you the results of both of those. So our staff survey on AI, we used our community of practice. So our community of practice decided that they wanted to do some research in that particular space. We got people from multiple different disciplines across the university to collaborate on trying to find out what was happening within AI. We went to the university's Education Academy to find our cohort. So that's our sample. The Education Academy is probably our best teachers sit in the academy. They are often prize winners. They're often teaching focused, so they're not necessarily involved in research in their discipline as much as they are research within education. So we asked them, they are typically, it's worth remembering, they are typically the best and most likely to be well-informed staff who work in the education space. And we wanted to know how AI had impacted on their learning, on teaching, and then by extension, the learning that they thought was happening within their classes. So we carried this out in the second half of 2023. We'll carry out another one in 2024 to see how attitudes have changed over time. But this gives us our baseline, because we know that in the first half of 2023, there was a lot of talk, there was a lot of activity, but not particularly constructive for many cases, where staff didn't really know what to do and how to react to this brand new technology. So we used the mixed methods approach. We used the Qualtrics survey. We got 30 usable contributions, which is about 79% response rate. We asked 7 sort of demographic type questions and a further 20 questions regarding the impact of AI on higher education. That included things like yes/no questions, like-it style questions, drop-down boxes, and of course, a couple of open-ended questions with the opportunity for short answers so that we could try and interrogate what was happening in a little bit more depth. We then followed that up with some interviews. People were allowed to identify whether they would be happy to be interviewed, and we then invited those, and 8 members accepted the invitation. So how did staff use it? Well, nearly 50% used it for their teaching. 35% used it for administrative tasks, and about 27% of it used it for research. Most had used it to check how good their assessments were in the light of an artificial intelligence engine being readily accessible by their students. And about half of those people had modified their courses in some way to address it. A large proportion of them were concerned about the impact of AI, and they'd taken some actions to remedy that. Of those who had used it, so we're talking about the bulk of the people, they'd listed ChatGPT as their dominant AI tool. That's not really surprising given the fact that it's the one that received the most media attention. In lesser quantities, we had people using Bing, and then other non-text-based tools such as Midjourney and DALL-E, and then things like Grammarly, which are recognized as having artificial intelligence elements to it. And then in research space, Otter and ResearchRabbit and Listen. Out of the 30 people there, 9 were comfortable using AI. So there's a genuine concern, I guess, that they didn't really have complete command over this particular new technology and its impacts. So where had staff used AI assistants? Mainly in assessment. A lot of them put their essay questions through ChatGPT. Other people used it to assist in administration tasks and generating new assessment tasks. Other activities were also listed, but those were the bulk. One respondent stated they used AI to format reference lists. We found that one quite interesting because we know that ChatGPT is not particularly good at doing that, and it does tend to make up things around references. So it's interesting that they were doing that. Hopefully they became aware that that might not have been optimum for that particular situation. Some people in computer science had used it to help them generate some code. And other people had used it for generating reports, to support them out there. I think it's important to notice that it didn't say they generated a report, they generated a few paragraphs for some of those reports. What we see here is quite a broad use of AI across a whole bunch of spectrum, a whole spectrum of academic duties, administration, research, and teaching. What we have got concerns about is the training issue. Those of you with a history in educational technologies will know that it's fairly common for the literature to report that training has been an issue. People didn't receive enough training, they wanted more training. And what we're seeing already in the AI space here at the university is that we've got 66% of people have done some professional development. Half of those felt that it was inadequate. And we see that we've got a gap between here, we've got adequate training sitting around about 23%, 78% of staff liking more support, and we've got this gigantic gap between what we're providing and what staff want. I think that's a big takeaway from this session, is that training is going to be a big issue for us. It has been for all other educational technologies, and this one will be just as bad. So I think those of you involved in administration or supporting staff, you might be finding this of interest. It's likely that this is mirrored across most institutions. How often are students using AI? So one of our lecturers in journalism, they were surprised to find that more students they expected indicated they had not used it. So the lecturer felt that there was lots of students using AI, and then was surprised to find that actually wasn't the case at all. A lecturer in agricultural studies, they recalled a seminar where students who they suggested they weren't actually game to use it. That means that they were a little bit wary of it or afraid to use it, or they did not want to use it because it might diminish their learning in some way or another, although they talked about the value of their degrees. So what we see here on the graph is we got students, they think students will be using it about once a month. And quite a few of them using it at least once a week. And what they found when they talked to their students is that's not the case at all. We'll report back on the student survey just shortly. Comments on AI. So these are probably the representative ones that are here. This semester, it's pretty bad. They use Grammarly so much that in the end, it's almost not their work. So for those of you who don't know, Grammarly it's like a spelling correction tool, but it's actually much more than that. It can do some paraphrasing for you. So it can take care of some of those issues and can talk about structure as well. So it's quite a helpful tool for people who are struggling, particularly in Australia, where people might be coming from other countries and they're struggling a little bit with their academic grammar in English. So there's this concern that Grammarly is being overused. One of the things that staff tried to get the students to do was to actually talk about how AI is being used when they engage with their learning, and then be able to demonstrate that. So they've said if you're going to use it, that's fine. Now, that's not always the case. That's just one example here. Another one noticed that educators are setting up scenarios where they're pretending students are not engaging with AI, and therefore they're not really being very transparent about what's happening there. They're kind of hoping the problem's going to go away to some extent, and that's not going to be the case with this technology. About half of the staff surveyed had modified their course designs. They used it to use it to create new assessment questions, to try and vary the methods that are being used there. Changing the essay topics to something that relied more heavily on fieldwork, so something that students had to do and be able to demonstrate they had done in order to be able to pass the assessment. And then one that's not particularly my favorite, using AI to generate poor quality written drafts with students then tasked to improve the content. I think that's the sort of task which is good if it's done in groups. I think it can be particularly risky if it's done in an individual process, because students may not be able to figure out exactly what's wrong with the drafts. And so it becomes a little bit problematic there. About 2/3 of people, they found that they had not provided, well, they basically said they had not provided information to the students about how to use generative AI. So we've got people making modifications to assessments. We've got a concern that lots of students are using AI all the time, and yet 2/3 of the people responding here said they actually hadn't told the students what they wanted. And that's not because they didn't want to tell them, it's because they probably didn't know how to actually get the students to use it in an ethical way. And ethics, academic integrity, and understanding the limitations of AI was one of the things that people were very concerned about, particularly for their students. and not so much for themselves. So that's the academic side. They see students using AI a lot, but finding out that maybe that's not the case. So we asked the students what they did. We looked at two faculties. We looked at health and we looked at humanities. We ran this in semester 2 last year, the same time as we did the teacher one, and we got 149 responses from each faculty, about half male, and about 66% of them were domestic. So in Australia, we've got a large domestic cohort, of course, but we also have a large international cohort as well. And particularly in health, we have a large number of international students, but also in that humanities space as well. So those demographics are about right for us. So it seems like a representative sample. So we're comparing the results from the two faculties. So Fable, that's the one with arts, business, law, economics, and education. Average age, about 21. About 58% of people in health used generative AI tools. About 54% of them in Fable did the same thing. 69% of these used it for university work. What sort of differences and what sort of things did they have in common across these two quite different disciplines? 39% of students felt comfortable using AI for uni works. More males than females did that, and we can see that's quite a staggering proportion there, 42 to 33. 45% felt comfortable using it for work, so more males than females. More domestic students than international students. 63% of it felt they used it to enhance their learning, more domestic than international students. 45% used it to help with assessments, so more male than female, and more domestic than international. So we can see that potentially there is a less risk-averse group in the males. They're more likely to do that. And we find that the international students are potentially less keen to use it in their studies. But we'll see here that they actually do trust what comes out of an AI, which is a bit of a problem. So a few concerns. About 38% of students felt that AI gave good feedback. More international than domestic students felt that was the case. 26% felt comfortable with its knowledge accuracy, but more international students than domestic students felt that. And it's quite a big difference there. And as we know, AI has issues with being completely factual, is prone to hallucinations. So if you feel that an AI tool is actually giving you accurate content without testing the credibility of that information, there's a potential risk there. So we see that some of the international students might be trusting it to give good feedback more than what they should, and perhaps they're a bit too comfortable with its knowledge accuracy. Where do students get their information? Well, when they can get it, they got it from within our university in this particular way. They got it from our library, which provides a guide. We see here the orange one is the arts and business and law and economics and education, and this is the health. So we see more students getting information from the library from Fable. We see more of them getting it from their course coordinator in Fable. We also see that for the rest of the options as well. We see here that we've got a large activity base around discussing things in class. So it does seem to be slightly different from the course coordinator. This is probably more of a group discussion by students within the class as opposed to the actual course coordinator talking about that, but it's a little unclear. They get some information from library guides, and they also get it from what we have. We have an academic integrity website, and there's some information about artificial intelligence there as well. We also have a program where at the beginning of every semester or trimester, we have academic integrity officers come into the class and talk with the students. The key thing about this is that the academic integrity coordinators who come to the class are students. So they've got a good rapport with the students in the class that they're talking to. And so when they talk about academic integrity, the students feel that it's coming from a place where it actually understands what they're going through. So the integrity website is something that our academic integrity officers refer people to. So it makes sense that people will be looking at that. And the discussion in class is likely to have come from some of those options as well. Okay, there is a question in the Q&A. I will get to that one, so we'll just stay tuned. How are students using AI? So let's have a look and see this. So the bulk of them seem to be using it to fix grammar. Given our large international cohort and the representation in this particular sample, that's not surprising at all. And arts tends to have more students who come in from international areas. That could be India, it could be China, it could be Thailand, it could be Peru. It could also be Canada and the United States as well. So, but mostly it's dominated by Chinese students, and then a nice smattering of other students who make the classroom much more vibrant and interesting. But nonetheless, that makes sense for that grammar is one of those things is useful for using AI. It's also being used to clarify concepts, generate resources, practice doing some tasks, generating an outline for a report, filling in gaps, taking notes or taking notes and summarizing them, building some frameworks for learning, doing some literature searches, doing some references. We definitely need to stamp that out. And then, of course, the searching for information as well. So there's no real surprises in this particular group here. It matches our demographics, and it also matches what we think people are likely to be using AI for. So in summary, students were using AI in moderate numbers. They were not using it for uni work as much as they were for external employment, which is an indication that we really have to get on top of artificial intelligence within the higher education sector. Because if students are using it in the workplace, but they're not using it at work, at university, then there's going to be this big mismatch, and an industry will think that we're not preparing our students well enough for this new technology. Students felt they weren't receiving consistent communication. They were not the avid users and abusers of AI that staff thought they were. And in fact, a lot of the students were very reluctant to use AI because they felt they didn't understand what the rules were. They didn't understand how they should be using it and how they could be engaging with it for assessment tasks. And a few little indicators with international students that there's maybe some students have a little bit too much faith in the technology. Possibly because they need it a little bit more than the domestic students, particularly for academic English. All right, but so the university decided that we would implement Turnitin's AI detection tools. Now, I imagine some of you are from computer science. I think you probably know what the answer to this is, but we did some tests. The short answer is no, we can't catch it, and I don't think we ever will be able to, not properly, particularly as it develops. We looked at a bunch of different tools. So we looked at Zero GPT, Writer, Content at Scale, Turnitin, Copy Leaks, and SEO.ai. And we looked at them and we tested them against putting in some content and trying to see how well it detected content generated by AI. So we asked ChatGPT to critique The House of Flying Daggers, and it provided us with some information. It has a style to it. Those of us who are looking at AI for long enough, you can recognize a particular style, and this one was noted. And so the question was said, okay, well, please make this more like it's a human's writing. And it gave a revised critique, which wasn't much better. We then looked at it and said, okay, can we now write it like a 14-year-old school student? And it really did a bad job of that too. It used words which an AI might think is something which 14-year-olds speak in, but they certainly don't write in it for school assignments, not particularly often. So that's something that didn't quite work there. But once they had done that, it basically got past an AI detection tool. And then we asked it, well done, you tricked the system. And the AI engine said, my purpose is to provide helpful and human-like responses. I'm designed to generate content that is indistinguishable from human writing as much as possible. That's not really what it's designed to do, but that's what it said. So we had this particular process there where we looked at that. And then we asked it to do that and then put in some more random words in. We know that putting random words into text can really confuse AI detection tools, and it did a really good job there, and we got a 0% score from that. And it didn't really break the content, even though the content wasn't particularly good to start with. We asked it to write a 500-word essay on academic integrity, and asked it to include some citations, which it then did. It's did a pretty good job of that. As we also know, sometimes it's not particularly in depth in the answers that it does, but this would have probably passed an assessment on that particular task if it wanted to. We then modified that particular assignment. So we tried to behave like a student and decide, okay, well, here's what an AI has generated. Now I need to make it seem like an AI didn't do it at all. So they're now using that to try and change it. So we did some standard sort of modifications. We did some paraphrasing. We swapped some list items over. We rearranged the structure of some sentences, used some synonyms, and we added in a few typing errors because we know that also is something that AI doesn't do. It writes very, very well. It's structurally very good. And then we tested that. So these were our results. What we found was that it was actually pretty easy for most of the tools to detect AI use. In the movie critique, The House of Flying Daggers, when we asked it to behave more like a human, it still did a pretty good job of detecting it. The 14-year-old student, also pretty decent, adding in some more randomness, also reduced it for some of them. But it was actually pretty good for most of those things here. The human abstract that was written as a baseline test came across pretty much as 0% across all of that. However, when we put the ChatGPT essay on academic integrity into the system, we started off with relatively high scores for many of these, although not exclusively. Writer only detected 3% AI use, even though it was 100%, and Content at Scale also did the same thing. When we did the tricks, when we did some paraphrasing and changed some of the words and some of the ordering and added some errors, Turnitin dropped below 39%, dropped below 40%. Copy leaks was pretty consistent, but most of the others dropped down quite significantly. Within the University of Adelaide, it's hard to know where a good number is for artificial intelligence, and where we might say, look, let's investigate this a little bit. But what we've typically done is we've said around about 40%, which is not based on anything. It's just based on the fact that we see that stuff that above 40% really did seem to have very clear signatures of being AI generated. Below 40%, it was 50-50. It was really hard to tell one way or the other, particularly when we know that some of the students are using Grammarly, and that does increase that score. And for the assignments we were looking at here, we weren't bothered by students using spelling correction or even structural correction on their sentences, as long as the work was of good quality. So what we see here is that it's actually quite hard to detect even the most basic modifications. And this is just using ChatGPT 3. We know that 4 and the latest version of 4 are much more robust in this regard, and I suspect we will be able to break this very, very easily. So in essence, I don't think we'll be able to detect AI use. We need to find a different way of dealing with this problem. We looked at Bing. We asked it to write an implications of using AI in a Bachelor of Arts degree. It suggested there was 1% human-generated content, and it gave us some advice. It said you should edit your text until there's less detectable AI content, which we promptly did. So we reworded the essay. We asked ChatGPT to reword the essay, and we saw that a lot of the detection tools dropped away and said it's 100% human-generated content for writer, for Content at Scale rather, and some of the others were very, very close to that. So ZeroGPT and Writer were unable to detect what was basically just an essay that was generated by AI and then run through another AI engine to try and reduce that detection tools. So what we find is that it doesn't matter what tools you use, and certainly when you start combining tools, there's ways of breaking this detection system. Okay. So what are some of our educators doing? Well, they're doing a lot of what we've just done here by using their own assessment tasks, running them through AI engines and seeing if they can break them essentially. See if they can get a pass mark, or even better, by using AI tools. We've seen this used very, very widely across the world, and we see that by and large, AI engines can pass or better most assessment tasks that we set. So there is a big problem there in that regard. Our educators are looking at their assessment tasks and trying to develop those which are more robust against artificial intelligence interference. They're familiarizing themselves with things that look like AI. So there's a certain flow to particularly to ChatGPT generated text. And if you're familiar with that and you're looking for it, even with the back of your mind, you can probably make yourself more adept as a marker and make better decisions about where students might be using AI generation. Often that AI generation doesn't produce high quality work, but it's enough to pass. People have looked at reducing the percentage weight of written assessments and increasing those in other spaces. So people are concerned about the fact that writing is very easily crackable using artificial intelligence, and then trying to maybe change the way they're assessing. So that might be including video submissions with narrated PowerPoints, semi-open book exams so they can bring in notes but not devices, and then things like that might be scenario-based assignments. So there requires a bit more interpretation of it. I've broken the bad news to all of them that none of these things are going to work, that artificial intelligence can definitely create video submissions, create narrated PowerPoints. It obviously can't inject itself into an open book exam where people are not allowed to bring in devices, but it's great at scenario-based assignments and exams as well. So what we need to be doing, some of the educators are focusing on what human-generated content can add to the basic factual material that can be produced using AI. Unfortunately, it's not just basic factual material, it's interpretation and synthesis that can be produced using AI. So some of that effort will probably be wasted, but it's a good way of looking at our assignments and trying to decide what works and what doesn't work. Be clear about the types of sources and references that are required, and trying to validate some of those. We've got some staff that are manually checking references. It's not sustainable and it certainly doesn't work at scale. And then maybe just saying, look, we know you're using AI or we'd like you to use AI, but please provide the information about what prompts you used and what the AI actually generated and then what you did from there. AI can do that, of course, as well. It can reflect reasonably well. It can certainly talk about how it used AI to generate that. So some of the learning that people think might be happening there is probably happening for a large number of students, but it's not necessarily happening everywhere because AI is so good at some of these human type activities. But nonetheless, we've got a lot of educators, our best educators, trying to find ways to engage with AI and make it meaningful and not impact on the learning experience of students. So what has the university been doing? The university reacted pretty quickly. It looked at our academic integrity policy and it decided that pretty much everything that we were doing in the academic integrity policy was pretty much still fine to use. We added in some additions about using technology as a potential source of plagiarism, but we didn't have to make massive changes to that. It more became an issue of communicating what could and couldn't be done with students, and that relies on the staff, and that becomes a little bit more problematic because we don't get a uniform response. But from a university perspective, we did very well there, I thought. We've developed guidelines for communication. So partially in response to various surveys that have been happening around the university, partially in response to increased numbers of students being reported for using AI tools within their assessments when they weren't meant to. And the communication is really important here because I talk about the students not meant to be using AI, but we also saw earlier on that staff weren't telling the students what they should be doing. So students were getting a little bit trapped here. Some of them obviously were quite overt in using AI and just trying to make things easy for themselves. But other students genuinely didn't know. They were getting one message from one lecturer and a different message from another lecturer, or no message from another lecturer. So it became quite problematic. So the university decided what we need to do is we need to be able to communicate what we want to the students better. And after a while, we had a better understanding of what AI could and couldn't do. And so therefore, we decided to develop these guidelines. And I'll talk about those in a moment. We've developed a course to develop staff awareness of AI, so just sort of increase that base of knowledge that sits around staff. A course to develop student understanding, particularly around the ethics of AI. And I'll show you a sample of that in a minute. We've got the community of practice, which has been great at bringing together people from all across the university to grapple with this issue. And the university has festivals of learning, which are basically just half-day events where people talk about specific issues in learning. And AI has been one of our two festival themes, and it featured quite heavily in the previous one as well. So it's been quite overtly advertised as being an issue by the university, and people have been engaging with that in large numbers. They've also introduced two new positions, a library liaison. So the library is a student-facing person operating 3 days a week, and they are essentially there to help students navigate where they can use AI for particular types of tasks and providing them with broad advice about what they can and can't do. And we've got a full-time centrally based AI director who sits in our academic central unit. He is a person who's actually come from a artificial intelligence machine learning background, is perfectly qualified for that sort of role. And his role is to orchestrate the university's response and communicate that not just to our to within the university, but also to external stakeholders like the government. So it's a very important role for the university. So that's what the university's done. I talked about those guidelines, so let's just flip back to those a little bit. They've been really difficult to develop, but we've based those around not assessment design, but around communicating what we want the students to do. And we want them to be as simple as possible. So we built this around a concept of how can AI be used not per course, but per task. So there might be different 2 or 3 tasks every semester for students to engage with. And what we've wanted to do is make sure that every task has very clearly articulated artificial intelligence guidelines for the students. And we've got 4, so very, very simple. And they are no AI. So no AI basically means you are not allowed to use AI in this assessment at all. The problem with that one is that you actually have to be able to enforce it. So no AI is typically going to be in vigilated spaces where students might do an exam or do some other sort of work. Because it's almost impossible to actually say no AI can be used, because we know students are going to be quite capable of using AI in it. So it's not only a case of communicating that no AI is to be used, it's actually got to be enforcing how that happens. So this is helping the academic staff evolve their practices. We've got AI-assisted editing. So that might be the use of Grammarly or spelling correction tools, structural correction tools to help craft a better piece of work. Which is great. Our students across the board can always do with a little bit of editing assistance, and a lot of them have been using Grammarly for years. It wasn't a problem until 2 years ago, and now it's become a problem. So AI-assisted editing is something that's which is allowed if you choose that particular option. AI-assisted ideas is quite different. So this is about brainstorming with an artificial intelligence engine. So using it to try and say, I want to design an assessment for class which is AI resistant. How would I do that? And getting AI to produce ideas around that. Then the human has to assimilate all those ideas and try and find a particular solution themselves and justify why they've chosen that particular process. They're obviously encouraged to look at references and find other sources of information within that AI-assisted ideas section. AI-assisted creation is actually unlikely to be particularly common, but an example of that might be students in architecture. They might be told, we want you to design a house that's going to fit these criteria. You may use AI to assist in that. And they might use AI-assisted creation to generate 5, 10, 20 different ideas of what this house might look like. And then they will have to be able to apply a certain criteria to make sure that they can justify their choice of recommended architectural design. So that's where creation really comes into it. It might also be included in things like generating code to support a particular program. And there's obviously a whole bunch of security issues around all of that, but that's where creation might boil into it. And the goal is it's got to be communicated to students for every activity, and the library has got citation guidelines that they've developed around artificial intelligence, so students know how to cite it when they've been using AI. We've got 2 courses. I'm just going to quickly pop across and just share you one of these courses. It's a 4-module course. It's built in our learning management system, which is Canvas by Instructure. And it's 4 modules. I'll just show you what those modules look like. It's about a student coming to university and not knowing how to navigate AI. It's a narrative-built design. So there's a story being told here. So Leon submits his first assignment. He hits a bump, as in he uses AI very badly and has problems. He heads out to work placements, and then he actually gets a job. And there's a quiz and some discussion forums for students to do. If I go back to previous page, we've got some animations. They're basically done for every module has the same look and feel. And in this particular one, they need to create a news item based on climate change. And the student goes through this. He's going, I'm going to use AI for this. And it comes up with something utterly unrealistic. So it talks about using various unrealistic options as the answer. And the conclusion here is that sometimes Buddy, the artificial intelligence engine, doesn't always get things right. And then basically there's a quiz, there's some readings, there's some interactive activities to do, and some various things like drag and drop. What does transparency in AI systems refer to? You can just drag the things across appropriately. And this module is all about transparency and accountability. So how do you use AI? How do you actually not acknowledge that you've used it? And it just goes down a structure where it walks students through the problems that exist with AI, and then talks about how you can actually avoid those things. And we've used some high-profile cases. The British royal family, when they posted a picture that was AI altered, not really. AI facial recognition used an innocent man to cause an innocent man to be jailed. We've got another one in there about AI videos being generated that fooled someone so badly that they transferred large sums of money to a corporation that didn't actually exist. So it's being used for a whole bunch of different things. Bunch of quizzes. We run a branching scenario to get the students to think through certain processes. All right, I'm not going to go on that for too much. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later. And we've done similar things, courses for staff. Okay, so assessment design is the last thing I'm going to talk about briefly. It's hard to address assessment design because essentially assessments across most of the sector are problematic. We haven't really, I don't believe that we have spent as much effort on assessment design as we should have over the last 100 years, and we're stuck with relatively generic and therefore easily crackable assessment tasks. But there are ways that we can fix them, but there's also a limited number of resources available to try and fix them. So what we wanted to do was try and identify which assessment tasks might be the most problematic and get people to maybe allocate their time towards fixing the most problematic ones rather than worrying about things that aren't too much of a problem. We came up with, we looked at the literature on assessment, and we came up with these aspects as being keys to good assessments. So assessment type, assessment format, content, the cognitive level addressed, and then we added in something about whether AI will be able to pass that assessment. So we've talked about that earlier on. Assessment type, things that are very easily cracked with AI and very difficult to detect when they've been used. Short essays, short answer questions, multiple choice questions, they're very, very easy to break. Things such as performances or exhibitions or debates are very high ranking because they're harder to crack using artificial intelligence. That's not to say artificial intelligence can't be used within it, but it's much harder to actually pass off an artificial intelligence's work as your own. So that's assessment type. If you're using short essay questions, it's going to get a low score. Assessment format. Text-based courses are more vulnerable than those requiring some demonstration of understanding. Open-ended tasks, such as essays, have got more capacity to resist an AI engine answering it than a shorter essay question or a quiz. Group work might be more resilient due to social and working environment pressures. So if you can get students working together, they may actually act as a protective buffer against overuse of artificial intelligence. Same with in-class activities where technology can be controlled, and tasks which have a particular timing associated with them, such as an exam or a quiz with a certain time frame on them. It doesn't give people the chance to go outside of that space because they won't have enough time to finish the task. Assessment content. And this is essentially about assessment design. So tasks that are constructively aligned with activities, they're likely to be at less risk of AI influences because ideally, if the activities that students do to learn the tools, the practice and the lectures and the video recordings support that learning, then they may feel less need to use external tools. Tasks that have been well scaffolded or staged with other similar low stakes tasks, building skills incrementally, are more likely to make students feel they can do the task without having to use AI. Tasks that are authentic and personalized can make it much harder for AI to address assessment criteria. And tasks that focus on a process rather than a product. So we're used to getting students to produce an essay. But in essence, if you actually talked about the components of an essay, building an argument, synthesizing resources, that might be something which is a lot easier to defeat AI. And then we looked at cognitive level. We chose using Bloom's taxonomy because people just know it. It's very common to be seen, and particularly people who are not focused in education, they understand what this means. They understand that remembering is much less level of cognitive skill required than analyzing or evaluating. So something that's low ranked, we decided it's going to be much easier to break using AI. Something that requires evaluation and judgment, less easy. Once again, not completely immune, but certainly less risky. And then we looked at AI analysis. Can the task be passed using an AI tool and appear like student work? We arbitrarily assigned some percentages here. So we decided the cognitive level was really important. So we gave that the biggest weighting. And then the others, we gave lesser weightings than that. It's arbitrary, and this is just pilot work at the moment, so we'll probably mess with these percentages at some stage, but it gave us some rough idea of how our assessments might be doing in the face of AI. And this is kind of our final slide. So this is what we did with 7 courses. We looked at a variety of ones from social science to data science to education into research, and we looked at how well it did in those particular courses using this particular rubric. What we see is that if we just skip past all of this and go to the totals, we see that only one course in media really did a particularly good job of resisting AI in terms of all of the things we just talked about. And some of them were quite difficult for the staff to actually engage with it and say absolutely definitively that AI wasn't being used, or that the assessments were safely immune or resistant to AI use. So we see here that one thing that we were particularly good at was getting a good cognitive level for our assignments. Some of them managed to resist artificial intelligence a little, but in terms of the actual design factors, things like was it constructively aligned, was it scaffolded, those sorts of things we didn't do as well in as we might have done, and that's where we find our assignments falling down in their resistance against AI. So as a tool for just defining whether AI can be used relatively easily to defeat the task, it's not a bad rubric. It's a good little guide for people to decide which tasks they want to put their efforts into. So if I was a university, I'd be saying, well, let's have a look at this data science one and this social science one. They're the lowest ranked here. Let's see if we can improve some of those and see what the nature of those improvements might be. That's it. So I'm finished. I can go straight to the question that's been asked, if that's all right. It says, what is your advice on the use of Gen AI for editing and revising written work by staff and students, including editing draft text or condensing content to meet word limit requirements? So I don't teach courses where grammatical structure or spelling is assessed. So my students come to me, they're mostly postgraduate students. And I think from my perspective, if I'm not assessing it, then they should be able to use Gen AI to try and improve some of that work. What I have seen is that some students overuse of AI, and it actually messes. I would have much rather have read the work where there was some spelling errors and some structural problems, because I at least understood what the student was trying to communicate. But sometimes it's been overused of Gen AI, and that might be translation. It might be just trying to get it to fix up paraphrasing and stuff like that. It actually becomes quite incoherent, and they actually end up with a much worse mark than they would have done without using it. So I think my advice would be to students would be, yes, it's okay to use it as long as you're not being assessed on your quality of written work. But I think it's actually important for us to teach the students about where the problems might arise from using it in a particular way. Is it possible to request a copy of these slides? Yes, I'm happy to circulate those. So May can probably contact me or Bo, and we can arrange that. Marie's also asked, how do we balance on the one hand the need for students to develop a certain battery of skills, and on the other hand the need to prepare them for a workforce? Yeah, this is our biggest problem. I think my biggest concerns about AI has been how much foundational knowledge will be lost because because AI can actually just use that foundational knowledge to present something at a higher level. It's slightly different from looking up stuff just online, because it actually coherently connects things together, and it gives you the illusion that you've actually understood something. So that foundational knowledge, I think we have to decide what we need and what we don't need, and what AI can actually do well. The bigger problem is critical skill development. So at the moment, when we've got AI in the workplace, everyone who's using it, who's been through university, has been trained to think critically and how to solve problems. So if they haven't developed that skill because AI has done it for them, then the workforce will end up being disappointed by the graduates that we send out to the workforce. And so I think there's a problem there. But similarly, we can't let the students not use AI at all, because when they get to the workforce, they won't be prepared. So there's a balance there that's required. I think from our perspective, the balance is around critical skills. If you can develop that problem-solving ability, which manifests itself in a variety of different ways across disciplines, then I think we'll be okay. And then we can let students use AI within the bounds that we will eventually discover. But we need to understand that AI is a developing tool. It's got content which is based mainly on the internet at the moment, and it's not the most robust source of great information. When it's built up with information which we trust, it's going to do a much better job of producing information. When it's got appropriate plugins to help with the referencing, it'll do a much better job at that, just as it's done with numerical calculations with plugins like the Wolfram Alpha plugin for maths. So I think we need to understand that the whole learning game is changing, and our teaching game has to try and change it. I think from my perspective, it's more space in the classroom, more focus on group work, to try and help develop those skills and get people to engage with each other and the problem, rather than using technology all the time to try and do it. When people are working individually, I think there's more risk involved in doing that. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my best bet at this stage. Relationship between cognitive level and use of AI a little bit more. Yes. Is it a positive correlation? We know that AI can easily answer short answer questions, and we can't detect them. We also know that multiple choice questions are very easily answerable. They're actually quite, you can actually develop them quite well with good feedback. So AI engines can answer those questions really easily. So I think the lower the cognitive level, the worse it's going to be in terms of how robust your assessment task is, and how little you can rely on student marks. That doesn't mean you can't use them for formative purposes, but for summative purposes, it's problematic. And I think the harder it gets, if you're looking for analysis, you're looking for creative works, you're looking for evaluation or management or judgment of tasks, AI is just a little bit less capable in that particular space. So I would say it's a positive correlation as you go up the hierarchy, if you want to look at it that way. Yes, it's probably time to review Bloom's taxonomy. I think, well, evaluation's pretty much the second from the top. So I think it probably is already quite high order. And I think anything around that analyze and up is something which is useful. I think I think I've seen a Bloom's taxonomy around which has got AI involved in it. So maybe have a look for that online and see if you can find it. I can't think of it off the top of my head. What do you think they meant when they said ChatGPT 5 can finish a PhD task? They may well have meant it. ChatGPT 4, particularly the paid version that you look at, is very robust in terms of addressing tasks. It's not perfect, and I don't really understand the extra computer sciencey bits that are sitting in ChatGPT 5. But if it's just, even if it's just changing the database that they use for developing the tokens for within the AI engines, I would say that if you improve the quality of the information that goes in, it's very likely that it's going to be able to produce a pretty good product outwards, particularly if they've got all the journal articles that all the academics over the last 50 years have put together. That's a really robust, high intellectual output. And if that's your data that you're actually working with and you're running some of the engines that they can use to use that data, I think they're going to be quite robust in terms of generating things like essays. Could it do an entire PhD? Probably not on its own, but probably if you broke it down into smaller chunks, I think it will be able to do the job effectively. So that's our next problem. That's tomorrow's problem. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Palmer. That was a very, very interesting discussion. And one, if there's one thing that I got from the discussion is that teachers really has a huge role in ensuring that our students use AI correctly, ethically, and I think as you mentioned, the learning game has changed a lot, and the teaching game should be able to adapt to that. We have I think designing assessments just got more challenging right now, and I think thank you very much for answering the questions in our Q&A box. If we have more questions from the attendees from our audience, I think we can cater one more.
Yep, I'm happy to stay and answer questions. That's fine. I think I'll just pick up on something you just said, mate. I think we're actually in the higher education sector is the hardest sector to deal with this. I think in the school sector, teachers have been trained to teach, so they know how to handle personalities. So they understand their student cohort, and they've got small classes of maybe 30, 40, something around that sort of mark. So they know when something doesn't feel right, and they can tell. But in the higher education sector, we don't know our students as well as we just can't. Some of us have classes of 800 students. You can't know them all, and therefore you can't know the work that they would normally be able to produce. So it's very challenging for us in that regard. We need to think about not just how we assess, but also how we teach, where we put our resources, because there's only a limited amount of resources. We have a flip side of AI. It can generate assignments. It can generate rubrics. It can generate content. It can do all of these things. And this is where we're probably going to have to pick up some of the time, throw some of those tasks to AI, cast a human eye over it to make sure it's consistently good, and then use that time to maybe spend more time in the classroom with our students.
I agree with that because I was thinking earlier if students can use AI to make their tasks, like need to help them with their tasks, us teachers can also use AI to help us with our tasks. And that time, as you have said, we can use that to be with our students more. Because as you've said, more time in the classroom, face-to-face interaction, that could also help them develop some of the skills that AI can't help them with. And so I guess no more questions from our audience. Again, we would like to thank you, Professor Palmer, for a very, very wonderful discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And I hope that we could invite you again soon,
Please.
so that we can continue our discussion about the role of AI in education, which is actually a very, very important, I think, important topic nowadays. So again, thank you very much. And we would like to encourage all our participants, our viewers, audience to please respond to the feedback survey at the end of this webinar. And before we end, I would also like to invite everyone for our next APSCE webinar, it's still about AI. It's going to be about approaches in human AI collaborative storytelling towards learning and mental well-being. So again, it's still AI and it's still education. It's all about learning. All right. So again, um, thank you very much. As to the slides that Professor Palmer used earlier, we can I think Professor Palmer agreed to give us a copy so we can distribute that to our audience. All right, so I guess we have to end our session this afternoon. Again, thank you very much, Professor Palmer, and I hope everyone learned a lot from today's session. And you have a good day, everyone. Thank you.